Please stand as you are able for the Holy Gospel according to Matthew. Glory to you, O Lord. As Jesus was walking along, he saw a man called Matthew sitting at the tax booth, and he said to him, "Follow me." And he got up and followed him. And as he sat at dinner in the house, many tax collectors and sinners came and were sitting with him and his disciples. When the Pharisees saw this, they said to the disciples, "Why does your teacher eat with tax collectors and sinners?" But when he heard this, he said, "Those who are well have no need of a physician, but those who are sick, go and learn what this means. I desire mercy, not sacrifice, for I have come to call not the righteous, but sinners." While he was saying these things to them, suddenly a leader of the synagogue came in and knelt before him, saying, "My daughter has just died, but come and lay your hand on her, and she will live." And Jesus got up and followed him with his disciples. Then suddenly a woman who had been suffering from hemorrhages for 12 years came up behind him and touched the fringe of his cloak, for she said to herself, "If only I touch his cloak, I will be made well." Jesus turned, and seeing her, he said, "Take heart, daughter, your faith has made you well." And instantly the woman was made well. When Jesus came to the leader's house and saw the flute players and the crowd making a commotion, he said, "Go away, for the girl is not dead, but sleeping." And they laughed at him. But when the crowd had been put outside, he went in and took her by the hand, and the girl got up. And the report of this spread throughout that district. The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Christ.
Please be seated. After some traveling around, Jesus is back in his adopted hometown, Capernaum. This is a fishing port on the Sea of Galilee. And he's well into his ministry by this point. So he's pretty well known in the area. Presumably, even a tax collector like Matthew knew about Jesus. Perhaps he had even met Jesus before, or heard him speaking to the crowds like during the Sermon on the Mount, or maybe he watched him heal someone. I think it's likely that when we hear in today's gospel Jesus saying to Matthew, "Follow me," that Matthew has already had the opportunity for Jesus to make an impression on him before that. Certainly, Matthew would have noticed a difference in the way people responded to him as a tax collector and the way people responded to Jesus. When it came to Jesus, people sought him out. We hear about this as we keep reading today's gospel. A leader of the synagogue asked Jesus to bring his daughter back to life. Sadly, his little daughter had died. And a crowd of people laugh at Jesus when he tells them, "The girl is not dead, but sleeping." Because they laugh because they know only God has ultimate control over life and death. And they don't realize that Jesus has a divine nature as well as a human nature. But Jesus doesn't let their laughter bother him. He takes the girl by the hand and brings her back to life. Jesus always lets God's love and mercy flow from his heart out to other people. The only times he really gets angry is when people are getting in the way of someone else's ability to reach out and connect with God. Meanwhile, Matthew knows all too well that people would rather avoid him. He's a tax collector. People disliked him, and for a much deeper reason than that they simply didn't like paying taxes. They disliked him because, for one, Matthew worked for the Roman Empire, who controlled their country. And two, as a tax collector in those days, It was common practice to charge people more than they were supposed to pay and then to pocket the extra for himself. Matthew may have even done this to the fishermen whom Jesus had already called as his disciples. You know, Peter, Andrew, James, and John. After all, they ran a fishing business, and they would have had to pay taxes on their catch. Ultimately, though, we can only guess at the backstory. When Jesus said, "Follow me," we don't know exactly why Matthew left his lucrative tax collecting position to follow Jesus. Maybe he felt guilty for cheating people out of their money. Maybe he wanted a new start. Maybe he was attracted by the lifestyle that Jesus demonstrated. But all we really know is that he got up and followed. But while Matthew may have left his old life behind, he did not leave his old connections and friendships with the other tax collectors behind. Because the first thing he did as a new disciple of Jesus was to throw a dinner party. And the featured guests were many tax collectors and sinners who sat down to eat with Jesus and the other disciples. Again, we see how Jesus always lets God's love and mercy flow from his heart out to other people, regardless of who they are. I've read lately about some research into what makes for people feeling a sense of belonging and happiness. And you might think of some of the obvious answers, like having positive family relationships or developing close friendships. And these kind of strong ties, as they're known, are important. But it turns out that another factor that is just as important is what they call weak ties. And this is a term coined by the sociologist Mark Granovetter way back in 1973. Yeah. Weak ties are the casual acquaintances in life. People like your mail carrier, the person at the checkout counter, the neighbor who walks their dog the same time as you. I'm sure you can think of many other examples of these kind of weak ties. And, you may or may not know their names. You probably do not have deep conversations with them, but you might chat for a bit, share a joke, a greeting, a smile. And when you do, you feel connected. You feel good. Also, in these kinds of weak tie interactions, you have the chance to learn new things. You hear new ideas. You gain a better understanding of how different people experience the world in ways that might be different from you. It turns out that you actually have a better chance of finding out about new ideas or new opportunities that you otherwise would never have heard about from these weak ties, because these folks usually run in different circles than you. So this is kind of like what we see happening at the dinner party that Matthew had with his fellow tax collectors and sinners, along with Jesus and the disciples. He was bringing together different social circles. People who may or may not have been acquainted with one another, but they were not close friends from these different circles. But they were making connections with each other. And this was a sign of God's kingdom coming among them. Because Jesus is always letting God's love and mercy flow out from his heart to other people. And by doing this, Jesus is helping to make people feel more connected to each other and to God. Whether or not the people from these different circles ever become good friends, they still benefit by gaining a sense that they belong to the same community under the same umbrella of God's love and mercy. It's also kind of like the neighborhood walk that several of our House of Prayer members, yeah, Sydney was there, after church last Sunday. This was with our Hop Outside the Box team. And even though mid to late morning on a Sunday was not a time when very many neighbors were outside, we still had the chance to build some of those important weak ties with our community. The man watering his lawn, the woman walking her dog, the couple puttering around in the garage. And we did not have deep conversations with these neighbors, but we did have a chance to share a smile, a greeting, and just to let people know that our church is part of the neighborhood along with them. House of Prayer is not an island that's set apart. It's for everyone. In a similar way to the experience of Matthew and Jesus and the tax collectors and the disciples, the neighborhood walk was a chance for us to gain different perspectives on the way God connects us to the whole human family, and to know that these connections, whether they're strong ties or weak ties, all of these connections are under the umbrella of Christ, who stretched out his arms on the cross and offers everyone a connection to God's love and mercy. Amen.